Welcome back to the Lathe Restoration series. We're going to get straight into stripping the bed and then obviously get into painting it as well.
Inside lane, missing exits, glued to the pavement. Between the lines, I keep my gaze straight ahead as the last stop flies by. No more waiting for the gun to fire. No more walking through revolving doors. I've gone around once, I don't need to go around anymore. Break away, forget your sober case. Stop dwelling on empty words. Stop stalling in the doorway and cancel the cruise control. Switch it in the manual. Don't you wanna feel right? Setbacks, you can't win them all, but I'm proud I tried. I'm glad we had a dialogue. It's good to shape the mind. Speeding up the pace, turning up the heat. Where I need to be for the first time. I'm taking risks, I'm casting off without a lifeline. Break away, forget your sober case. Stop dwelling on empty words. Stop stalling in the doorway and cancel the cruise control. Switch it in the manual. Don't you wanna feel right again? Don't you wanna feel whole? Don't you wanna feel?
So the bed's had a few coats of paint, just buff these bolts up here just because they're full of rust and the old coatings of paint and all kinds of grime. So just getting the bolts put through the bed into the stand here. This can always be loosened off and adjusted later down the line if needed, if we need to shim the bed, of course, if there's any twist in it. Just checking here that the paint's dry. When I was doing the stand, I was struggling to get the paint on quick enough where it was drying on the brush. And then when I did the bed, it was almost like the same thing, like the paint was drying on the brush. But once the paint was on the bed, it took literally like a couple of days to dry. So finally here it's dry, I can pull the masking off. And we can get started on the rack gear for the apron. before we get to the rack gear, pulling the tape off, there was some surface rust on the ways of the bed and also some high spots. So what you'll see in a moment, I'll use a hard Arkansas stone, which is a sharpening stone with a very fine, I don't want to say grit, but fine sort of material stone. If you're not familiar with our hard Arkansas stones, they're used for a lot of knife sharpening and bits and pieces like that, but for getting the surface layer of rust off the ways and just getting those high spots down without taking too much material away at a time, the hard Arkansas stone is absolutely perfect for this process. So you'll see here I'm just looking for any rough areas, anywhere the etch primer got through the frog tape, any sort of damage. There's a couple of dents on the first ways that I'm working on here, and they created some high spots, so you'll see I'll just pay attention to those in a moment. I actually use a Sharpie just as I'm going over it, just to mark out the areas that I need to pay extra attention to, which you'll see in just a moment. Just doing a quick test here. This is by no means the end of working on the ways, but I was just putting a bit of downward pressure on, just seeing if I could find any nicks or dents in the ways that you could feel while pushing the saddle across the ways. Here I'm just putting the rack gear on. Now the rack gear has been cleaned up, just been buffed, and you see the screws here are full of years and years of dirt and grime, so they were just soaked in a bit of acetone, and then I just cleaned out the heads. The gear itself just going on there, and you'll see the gear actually engages the apron with this gear here. So as you turn the handle, it moves the saddle up and down the ways. Very simple design. Might have to look at the bearings in the apron because they are a little bit noisy, but hopefully they're not too expensive to replace. On the headstock here, I'm just removing the mounting plates which secures it to the bed. Now I'm removing the spindle lock. As you'll see throughout this process, I'm just going and removing bits and pieces. Then when I get to taking the actual spindle itself out, it was a bit of a task, which you'll see coming up. It was just making sure everything was taken apart with care, making sure nothing was needing to come off first. I was just going over looking at how this, I mean I had a general idea of how this thing came apart, but I was just taking my time, not wanting to damage anything. And you'll see I take the back gear sort of action at this. You've got like a bar that sits on a pivot point, and that's what engages the back gear and disengages the back gear. You'll see it on the top there. So I'll just take all that apart first, then I end up pulling out the back gears themselves out, and then we get to hitting the spindle out, which was a bit of a task. It probably took a little bit longer because I wasn't giving it full pelt with the piece of wood that I used in the hammer, just because I didn't want to damage anything. But regardless, it was quite a lengthy process. So there's a little grub screw here that I'm removing, and then after that's removed, the piece will come out, and it's just a case of a bit of a Bit of finger gymnastics to get the selector out for the back gear. I'm hoping these bearings are okay. I mean, they should be. When the headstock was together, I didn't notice any sort of grinding or anything like that, because I'm pretty sure that these bearings in the headstock are quite expensive to replace. Now what you won't see here is I actually pulled the face plates off the headstock that are riveted on, and then give a full degrease and jet wash of the headstock housing just to get it as clean as possible. Dried it off and then just blowed it off with air to make sure it's completely 100% dry.